Welcome back, everyone. Today we're revisiting another Piers Morgan podcast. This time he was on the Triggernometry show, channel, podcast, whatever you want to call it, and he was asked some key questions. His views on October the 7th, how the war has evolved, his stance, and also the repercussions. Let's get straight into it.
I mean, you've been one of the people who's covered the Israel-Palestine conversation the most thoroughly from different sides. You've taken a hell of a lot of stick and flack online from everybody. From everyone. Why have you focused on that issue as much as you have, first and foremost?
Well, when it happened, it was obviously a horrific incident, this terror attack on October the 7th. In all my days in journalism, straddling nearly 4 decades now, it was right up there with some of the worst things we've ever seen. So I realized the scale of what had happened was going to be enormous in terms of repercussions, in terms of analysis, in terms of what Israel would do by way of response. It was very like 9/11. What was going to happen after that? And as we saw, the repercussions are now still ricocheting around the world. So I felt like it was going to be an enormous story. I also felt that it was incumbent on someone like me, who tries to avoid boxing myself into partisan political camps. You know, I don't associate with any party. I don't really see myself tribal in that sense. I prefer to come at it as a journalist with an open mind, but with an ability to go after both sides if I feel like their argument is flawed. Now, this is not an environment we live in these days, as you guys will know from the kickback you get. If you do that, you get attacked by everyone, because there are a lot of extremists on both sides of almost any debate. Brexit, Trump, Israel, Hamas, whatever it is, Ukraine, Russia. And they will suck the oxygen out there. And then everyone on social media will pile in on behalf of their tribe.
Piers states he doesn't associate himself with any party, but it's very clear where his heart lies. The countless guests and debates he's had on the show clearly shows him being more favourable towards the Israeli side. He still to this day doesn't or hasn't outright condemned anything Israel has done.
So early on, I was aware that the numbers we were getting of people watching for things like Bassem Youssef, 23 million people watched that on our YouTube channel. Absolutely enormous number. I then went to America and did 2 more hours with him face to face. 12 million watched that. So we were getting these gigantic audiences for this stuff. And I realized that one of the reasons was people liked the fact I had everybody on. They liked the fact that it didn't really matter to me who they were. They had a big following and had influence. I wanted them on the show, and I wanted to have a proper examination of what they believed and what they stood for. And I think it's been a really interesting exercise. I mean, I think that we've positioned ourselves as a show as somewhere that people may feel annoyed by if it doesn't suit their tribal concerns, but there is an appreciation and a respect for the fact that I'm at least platforming everybody.
To give credit to Piers, one thing he has managed to do and do very well is to get credible members on the show to discuss these matters. If I'm honest, when I say credible, I genuinely mean the pro-Palestinian guests he's had on. They've done a very, very good job. The Israeli spokesmen and women, Jonathan Conricus, Hassan Fleur, as well as many others, well, we've seen what they had to say.
Because I think that's really important.
And this is going to sound like a strange question, because it's something we take almost entirely for granted now, but why do you think a conflict which is quite far away from these shores, from the shores of the United States, is so central to the conversation we've been having for, it will soon be a year?
Well, look, I think the root of all, and I go back to when I was on the Daily Mirror, which I left 20 years ago, right? And one of the last things I did was oppose the Iraq War. I remember going back, to my days on the Daily Mirror 20 years ago. And my last big story really was the Iraq War and the consequences. And if you look at the root cause of a lot of the problems in the Middle East, it goes right back to 1948, right back to what happened then, right back to this Israel-Palestine conflict, which has never been resolved. And it's all blown up in spectacular fashion with the worst kind of acceleration of this conflict into open war in the most catastrophic manner. So it didn't surprise me that it became a huge global story, because the repercussions go everywhere. They go right through the Middle East. They go obviously to America. Fascinating to watch how America's responded to this, how a Democrat president is getting a lot of flack from the pro-Palestinian people in America who think he's not doing enough for them. He's getting a lot of flack from pro-Israeli, people saying, why aren't you defending us more? And I said at the start of this, and I still say it now, this is one of the most complex moral stories I've ever had to cover.
His last big story was the Iraq War. For anyone wondering why there's so much coverage on the Piers Morgan Show, this is probably why. The views are astronomical, which only means one thing: ching ching.
And frankly, I've become known as someone who asks everybody, do you condemn Hamas? Well, if you don't condemn what they did on October the 7th, I don't really want to have any more time with you. If you can't condemn the slaughter of 1,200 people and 6,700 more wounded, if you can't just condemn that act without any equivocation, it's a kind of pointless conversation. If you can, and a lot of my pro-Palestinian guests have done that, then I can have a proper conversation with you. Similarly, on the other side, if your only view on the pro-Israeli side is we've got to wipe them all out in Gaza, I have no time for that either. So it's not like, I will platform people right to the point I think they're complete nutcases. And it's a complicated story, deeply difficult story. And I fear we're now into a phase of this conflict that is going to take many, many years to try and sort out.
It's a really profound point you're making there, Piers, because when we interview people, they're always either pro-Israeli or pro-Palestinian. And what happens when you have those conversations with those types of people, no matter how well-intentioned they are, is they're only presenting one side of the story. Yeah. So I guess my question to you is, how do you see this conflict? What is your analysis of it?
It's evolved. There's no question. Very early on, I was adamant that Israel not only had a right to defend itself after the scale of that attack, but had a fundamental duty to its people to defend them from any further attack, particularly given that the Hamas official spokesman was on camera saying we're going to keep trying to do this again and again and again. No Israeli prime minister or government could do anything but do what they could to defend their people. And I think any country in the world that would apply. So I took that as my starting point. They have a right and a duty to defend themselves. But very quickly into it, it was clear that the scale of the response from Israel was going to be pretty much unprecedented. And then the question becomes, what is too much? What is acceptable? What strays into potential war crimes? At what point does your right to defend itself give you the right to obliterate large sections of Gaza and tens of thousands of innocent people, particularly given that half the population is under 18? I mean, that's a staggering number of children. And particularly given the complexity of the fact that Hamas deliberately embed themselves amongst the civilian population, making it incredibly difficult to target terrorists from civilians. So that's what I mean about this being a very difficult story to cover and a very difficult moral quandary for me.
Fleur Hassan denied everything, and yet Piers gave her all the time in the world. In regards to Piers's analysis, he states Hamas officials were on video. However, if we go back, way back, Piers's initial prognosis regarding babies and women, we still haven't seen the evidence. He states he took a certain position based on the evidence that he's seen, but where is the evidence of the babies and the women that he was banging on about for the first 6 months post October the 7th? It's not very difficult at all. He mentions Hamas are hiding among civilians. If that's what you believe, then why were refugee camps and hospitals targeted? Why were journalists and doctors targeted?
You're seeing now Netanyahu sort of suggesting we're nearing the end of the war. Well, how? You haven't got rid of Hamas. That was your stated mission. And it's an interesting thing with public opinion in Israel, because the polls suggest that they support the elimination of Hamas, majority of people in Israel, but they do not support Netanyahu personally. And so the moment this war's over, he's almost certainly going to be out of a job, and then he goes in to face corruption charges in a trial. Where's the incentive for Netanyahu to end this war? And he's being driven by some very right-wing members of his cabinet, Smotrich and Ben Gvir and others. And their language, I have to say, I don't think Israel is waging a genocide because it has the tools to actually wage a total genocide of Palestinian people in Gaza. But I do think some of the language some of those people have been using has been genocidal. And I can understand why people are very fearful that that is what they really want to do.
This is where I lose even the pea size of respect I have for Piers, if I had any. He states he doesn't think Israel have committed genocide because They have the tools for total destruction. But they have, from the north to the south, there is destruction everywhere, and it continues even whilst I do this video. It hasn't stopped. It's happening and continuing as we speak. Anyway, I appreciate everyone watching my videos. Support me by liking and subscribing. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below, and I'll see you on my next video. Peace out.